Can They Do It Themselves? A comprehension-based ESL course for young children. My name is Sarah Lozier, and this is my presentation on Chapter 12. This study was done by Patsy Light Brown, and it focuses on a group of young children learning English as a second language. What makes it different is that students weren't pushed to speak at all, at least not at first. Instead, the program was built around listening and understanding English through things like stories and actions. The big question Light Brown wanted to answer was, can kids really learn to speak English just by listening and understanding without being directly taught to speak? This idea challenges a lot of traditional teaching approaches, so it's pretty exciting to look at how it played out. This study is grounded in a comprehension-based approach, which is different from how we usually teach languages. The idea is that students should first focus on listening and understanding the language without being forced to speak right away. There's also no correction of errors in the beginning. The goal is to make kids feel comfortable and confident just by understanding what they hear. This method is based on second language acquisition research, which shows that learners often benefit from a silent period where they take in the language before using it themselves. It's kind of like how babies learn their first language by listening a lot before they say their first words. For the design of the study, this study took place in an English language elementary school in Quebec and involved kids between 6 and 8 years old. There were 2 teachers running the program, and they followed a comprehension-based ESL method, meaning students weren't expected to speak English right away. The lessons were short, about 30 minutes, and happened 3 to 4 times a week. Early on, the kids were just listening and responding in nonverbal ways, like pointing to pictures or acting things out. This design was all about creating a low-stress environment where kids could understand English before being asked to produce it. Key findings. The results of the study were really encouraging. First, the students developed strong comprehension skills. They were able to follow classroom instructions and understand English without feeling pressured to speak. Over time, the students started to speak English on their own, and when they did, their speech showed real understanding. What's interesting is that their errors were few, and when they did make mistakes, those mistakes actually revealed that they were processing the language meaningfully and not just guessing. Also, the kids had really positive attitudes toward English. They felt confident, which is huge for language learning. So overall, the findings support the idea that focusing on comprehension first can lead to more natural and effective language use later on. What can teachers learn from this study? So what does this mean for us as teachers? First, it reinforces the idea that we don't need to push students to speak right away. Giving them plenty of time to listen and process the language builds confidence and leads to more natural speech later on. We also need to create environments where students feel safe to take risks, where making mistakes is just a part of learning. The activities we use should be meaningful, not just worksheets or isolated grammar exercises. This study really challenges the idea that language learning has to be grammar heavy from the start. Instead, it shows us the value of comprehension-based programs, especially for young learners. It's a great reminder that listening and understanding are powerful tools in second language development. My analysis and reaction. Reading chapter 12 really made me rethink some of my assumptions about how young children learn a new language. I used to think that encouraging them to speak early was key to progress, but this chapter helped me see that listening and building understanding first can actually be so much more effective. What surprised me most was how much language development happened during what they called the silent period. The children weren't producing much language at first, but they were clearly absorbing a lot. When they did start speaking, their language was more natural, more accurate, and more confident. That really stuck with me. It also made me think about how easily teachers, including myself, might unintentionally pressure students to speak before they're even ready. This chapter reminded me that language learning is a process and we need to honor that process, especially when it comes to young learners who are still developing confidence and comprehension. I appreciated how the study created a learning environment that was rich in meaning and context. The emphasis wasn't on drills or grammar lessons. It was about helping students understand real language and real situations. I could see myself applying this by using more stories, games, visuals, and listening activities in my own teaching. Overall, this chapter encouraged me to be more patient, more observant, and more supportive. Just because a student isn't speaking yet doesn't mean they're not learning. We need to give them the time and tools to make sense of the language first, because when they are ready, their voices will come through. For the pedagogical implications of chapter 12, let's talk about the real takeaway here. What can we do as teachers based on this chapter? So one of the most important pedagogical implications is that we need to focus on comprehension before production. This challenges a lot of traditional thinking about language teaching, where speaking is often pushed early on. But chapter 12 shows us that giving students a chance to listen, process, and understand first actually helps them speak better when they are ready. That leads to my next point, creating a meaningful language environment. The classroom shouldn't just be about repeating vocabulary or filling in blanks. It should be a place where students hear real language being used in context, through stories, shared routines, and engaging activities. The study also showed that the silent period is valuable. We need to give students permission to just be silent for a while, knowing they're actively learning even if they're not speaking yet. That kind of patience and trust can make a huge difference in how students feel about learning English. Another thing I loved was how much the researchers use visuals, stories, and predictable routines. These tools help students connect language to meaning, which supports deeper understanding. It's not just about hearing English, it's about seeing how English works in daily life. And lastly, it was a great reminder to prioritize consistent input over isolated drills. Exposure to real contextual language is much more effective than drilling students on grammar rules. So even though drills have their place, they shouldn't be the focus, especially for young learners. All of these implications really helped me rethink how I'd want to set up my own classroom. The chapter doesn't just tell us what works, it shows us why it works. And that's what makes it so useful. What this would look like in the classroom. So first off, routine is everything. When students know what to expect, they can focus on understanding language instead of just figuring out the classroom flow. Stories, songs, and visuals can really carry the weight of instruction. I'd make sure to include tons of gestures, facial expressions, and even physical objects that students can see and touch. One of the biggest shifts for me is honoring the silent period. Instead of pushing kids to talk, I'd watch how they react. Do they smile when they understand? Are they following directions? These are powerful signs of learning. I would also start celebrating these nonverbal successes just as much as the spoken ones. It's all about recognizing growth wherever it happens. So final thoughts and a big question. So as we wrap up, I'm left with a powerful thought. Are we really giving our students enough space to simply listen? This study challenged me to rethink the ways I measure learning. Silence doesn't always mean lack of understanding. In fact, it can be an essential part of the process. It's the time when students are making sense of all the language and information they're absorbing. I've realized that too often we expect students to speak before they are ready, and we miss the growth happening silently. For multilingual learners, this silence is often part of their internal processing, which is a time to connect the new language to their own experiences without pressure to articulate just yet. Moving forward, I will carry this idea with me into my teaching. It's about shifting our focus from the need for immediate verbal output to honoring those quieter moments that are just as important in language development. So my big question is, are we truly creating the space for students to process, reflect, and listen before we expect them to speak? That's something I'll be reflecting on long after this course. Thank you so much for your time.